Hey everybody, I am popping on here today for a real quick little micro training on mining for the gold in stories. You know I'm going to talk about stories. I talk about them all the time, and if you're not tired of hearing it yet, I'm just going to keep going. But there's so many aspects of storytelling that really can beef up everything about the way we do business, the way that we interact with one another on social media, or even in real life. Sitting around the dinner table, it's great to have some stories in our back pocket that we can share, and it's such a great icebreaker to begin learning the art of storytelling so that we can relate to people. Really, at the end of the day, story is about connecting, and for me, that's been such a powerful gift in my life. I do it professionally, but I am from a long line of storytellers that just loved connecting with people over stories. And my family, I can remember my parents sitting up late at night telling stories and laughing, probably crying. And I could hear them as I was trying to go to sleep, telling old stories that I knew by heart, but they were telling their friends while I listened from the other room. And it's just always been a foundation of my family history, and because of that, I'm so grateful that I get to make a living helping people tell stories. Often people will come to me and they'll say, people tell me that I should write a book, but I don't know if I have a story, or they'll know they have one, they just feel completely overwhelmed to write it. And what I want you to know today is, if you have a story or you don't know if you have a story, it's always a relief to find that really every major epic story is created by a series of micro stories. I began telling my story on Substack this year, and because I really wanted to be able to relate to my clients who, have these really major epic stories that they have lived through and that I've helped them write books on. I've got this little stack of some of the books that I've helped people write back here. And every single one of them, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such a major story. But every single one of them we told by going back to these moments that they remembered that impacted them or that changed them in some way. And so when I started writing my story on Substack, it's harder to write your own story, I believe, but because you're so close to it. But when I would zoom out and look at myself as a child and go back to micro moments, like, what did I smell? What did I see? What did I feel? All the five senses. How did that taste? I can recreate my stories so much better when I just go back and try to recreate a moment. So I say that to you to say, writing a story of any kind, whether it's a customer story, that was, somebody was impacted by a product or a service that you want to highlight and tell other people about, or maybe it's an employee story that you want to highlight as somebody that is doing great things in your company, or if it's a memoir, like the ones that I help people write. It all comes back to recreating moments, and we recreate these moments by observation. If you keep a journal, can be a really powerful way to go back to moments, and you might think about, oh, what was I thinking in college? If you kept journals, you may be able to trigger memories by going back and looking at those moments, or even photos that you have of yourself with people. Those things can all help you observe your story in terms of micro moments, and recreating how you felt, what you were looking at, what the weather was like. All those little tiny moments come alive with detail when you realize that every epic story is really just a series of creating moments. I'm learning the craft of screenwriting the past few years, and that too is like, you have to just create moment after moment that reveals what your character is thinking and feeling. And it's such a powerful visual way to tell a story that I'm learning a whole new aspect of appreciating moments. And so today I just wanted to encourage you that whether you're writing for business, whether you're writing your memoir, whether you are, just trying to come up with a good social media post about what you do and what you are passionate about, recreate moments. One of my favorite series right now on Apple TV has been Shrinking, and it is a very funny show about grief, and they're dealing with a very epic, relatable topic, but also very sad and heavy topic with a lot of humor and a lot of great characters. It's such a great class in storytelling. It's created by Brett Goldstein, or he's on the writing team, producing team, and Brett was in Ted Lasso, which was another of my favorite series. He was a writer and actor in that. One of the most powerful scenes, which was in the last moment of the last episode of this last season of Shrinking on Apple, Brett Goldstein sitting at a train station where he had once sat with, his girlfriend who was long gone at this point, and he and she would make up stories about people, guess what they did for a living and where were they headed on this train. They would make up these stories to one another, and it was kind of a way that they, bonded and spent time. And it was such a good example of how stories are told. You pick something and just start observing it and tell what you see. And it really can be that simple. And it can be humorous, it can be moving to just observe the life that's happening around you. We have stories happening all around us all the time. And the first secret, I guess you could call it, it's not really a secret, but I'll call it one, to finding a great story is to be observant and to look at the things that are happening around you that other people are missing and to find meaning in it. And this can happen watching a bird build its nest and just noticing and being aware of the tiny little details that the rest of the world isn't tuned into. And you can tune into a story and begin to form a narrative around it. What is he looking for to build this nest? Just start to find these little details and then begin to ask questions about whatever it is you're observing. A wonderful opportunity for fodder around observation is to sit in a coffee shop and make up stories about the people that are there. Are these two people old friends? Did they just meet? What do they do for a living? And it just helps your brain to start beginning to warm up the kind of grease the tracks, warm up the storytelling vibes in there. Because we all, I do believe, respond to story in a powerful way that helps us remember things that we wouldn't remember if it were just information, facts. In fact, there's a Stanford University marketing professor named Jennifer Aker, and she's usually the one credited with the statistic that 22%, and I don't know how she came up with that number, but an estimated 22% more details are remembered if told in a story, as opposed to just given as a list of information or dates or whatever. I would probably guess a little bit higher even than 22%, but I do know that it's much higher retention for people to hear information in the form of a story, or hear a concept, or get introduced to a concept in the form of a story, because when we think of telling our stories or telling a story for a keynote address or writing a book, we think about big stories, and it can feel overwhelming, like this big, hero's journey. And that is great. I love those big epic stories. My husband and I recently did all 3 of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, like in a pretty short succession of time. And it's such an epic story. And just like, what? There's so much going on and so many layers. And, obviously that's a complex story, but even that is made of little micro story moments that are the details and the relationships and all the little dynamics. There's so many micro stories in the major story. And so today I want to talk about the little stories, the moments, the teeny details that eventually come together to create epic story. We think of it as being so overwhelming. Even writing my story, I've done some of that on Substack this year, and writing my story has felt a little bit overwhelming when I thought about my whole life and what I'm going to talk about. But I would always go back to the little moments. What did I feel in that moment? It can be a moment of a decision or an event that happened, or a life change, or even just an observation that help me see things differently and help change me. Whether it's we who are the main character in our story, or we're writing stories about others, customer stories, people who have been changed by a business or a product, in some way. Those things are all opportunities to get into the details and help take the listener on a journey of that character's arc. Even the tiniest little details and stories are always part of a bigger story. And so it doesn't feel as overwhelming to write a big epic story if we take it moment by moment, a character and their decision and who they were before or after, or how they saw the world before or after. While observation is a powerful foundation for noticing the gold that's all around us, that's happening all around us all the time, that observation is such a big part of it. But it only goes in and out the mind as an observation until we write it down. And learning to write something down doesn't have to feel intimidating. Some people love to write, and it's a fun process. If you haven't enjoyed writing in the past, I would encourage you to not think about it as like, I'm writing something and it has to be great. Maybe walk outside or to a coffee shop and begin to write some observations that you see, and just see what happens. You don't have to know where the story's going all the time to start just making notes of things that come up for you, because there's sometimes a reason something stands out or comes up, and sometimes you can just take the tiniest detail and create a whole narrative around it. I'll give you an example that is one of my favorites. Anne Lamott is one of my favorite authors of all times, and her book Bird by Bird I read early in my writing career, and it was a just life-changing experience to read her work, because she challenges people to create a 1-inch window. And she does this by telling a micro story about lunchtime as a grade school kid. And she has this whole thing about the kind of bread that you have, and you could always tell if your dad packed the lunch, because he didn't have the standard bread that was the most acceptable bread at the lunch table. And she has all these fun observations about just remembering and going back and thinking about sitting at the lunch table as an intimidated kid, hoping that your lunch measures up and it's cool enough to get out and be proud of. And it is so funny that, and relatable, that I started remembering my lunch periods and all the things that, went through my mind when I opened my lunchbox. And my dad used to write little notes on my napkin. He would often help Mom pack lunches, and he would always, write a note on my napkin. And, her story reminded me of my own. I say that because 2 reasons. Her 1-inch window into sitting at the lunch table as a kid seems like a very small, insignificant story, but I was howling by the end of it because it was so spot on everyone's experience. And so it doesn't have to be this big epic, Lord of the Rings trilogy. It can be a moment that you create from your life that other people are like, oh my goodness, I had that moment too, because a lot of kids have the same, experience at the lunch table, trying to, figure out, where they stand in the social pecking order. But really, every epic story is made of moments, and creating moments is the goal. So if you're storytelling by writing a memoir and it feels like, oh my gosh, how will I ever tackle this? Just go back and recreate a moment, a decision that you made changed something, or a moment when something happened and there was a shift, and you have a before, during, and after format that you can tell immediately. As soon as you go back to that moment, it's like, okay, my senior year I decided to go this way instead of that way. Take us back to that moment. What were you thinking before you made this decision? Who were you before you made this decision, or before that thing happened? How did the thing happen? And then what happened after? That is the simplest little format for creating a story that you could find. It's a before, during, and after. We can go back to relationships, decisions, turning points, things that happened, things that we've gone through. Sometimes a tragedy or an accident or a loss can be that inciting incident that keeps not going away. It's there, and bringing it out and talking about it and thinking about it and going back to those moments might feel like it would be hard. It might feel like I don't want to think about that if it's a difficult thing. But it's so healing to be able to go back to those moments and look at who you were before, what happened, and then what shifts did that create for you. And always in those stories, there's opportunity for overcoming, for growth, for learning things about yourself, learning things about life that other people can benefit from. Other people benefiting is the other beautiful thing about even those micro stories. Even like Anne Lamott's lunch table story. The reason that it's funny is because we've been there. Many of us have been there in that social situation, wondering what people thought of our lunch versus theirs. When you begin to focus on observation and you begin to observe the stories going on around you and begin to put your own spin or your own creative ideas into it, you'll realize that there are way more ideas for stories than time to tell them. So I hope that you'll begin to look at the world with possibility and begin to see, oh wait, there are things happening all around me that other people might be missing, and I don't want to miss it. To be able to fill in detail and help recreate the moment so that someone feels that they're there, that is storytelling at its very simplest. And it's not overwhelming or hard. It's just a matter of observation and capturing detail. I hope that this has been helpful for you to begin to play with the idea that story doesn't have to be complicated or long or wordy. It just has to be powerful. And powerful can be simple. Powerful doesn't have to be long or drawn out, but it does have to take people on even a tiny journey. Any story that you create by looking around you and observing real life is going to have that ring of truth to it that people can relate to. So I hope you'll take this little micro training and begin paying attention as you begin to look at your own day-to-day life and begin to draw out some stories just from observing and recreating moments. You might begin to realize that you do have a story to share. It's probably a series of tiny stories that have brought you to today and made you the person that you are now. Even a life that you may not think is noteworthy becomes extremely interesting and extremely relatable when you begin to recreate moments that meant something to you, people you met along the way who changed you in some way or made your life better. Those are the moments that seem simple, and it seems like, is there story there? But if it meant something to you, it will mean something to a reader. And that's what story is about. That's the point, is creating meaning out of the everyday events of life. If you use that on social media, if you use it in your business, if you use it in a memoir, no matter what type of storytelling it turns out to be, recreating moments brings meaning to people's lives. And I encourage you to begin to observe and write things down and see what happens, see what you notice. And I would love it if you'd share with me anything that you glean from the practice of observation and recreating moments for others to enjoy. I hope this has been helpful. If you are interested in learning how to tell your story or to attending storytelling events, please visit my website at emilysutherland.me. I hope that you'll go and check them out. There's storytelling retreat for those. It's a 2-day opportunity to write your story in form of a book. Or there's 1-day events around storytelling for business and also just nurturing your creativity and getting in touch with that creative part of you that can impact everything that you do and make everything a little more fun. So I hope you'll join me there, and I hope to see you sometime in real life in 2025. Always feel free to send me a message if you have questions or if I can be of help to you.